We're good. Everybody else good?
Yep, we're all set. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. We're all very concerned about the remote learning that we've been told is going to be happening in multiple school districts. We've all heard from our constituents. We've read the McKinsey report, which talks about the negative effects remote learning has had on students. You lose a year of a kid's life, you don't get it back. And it's really hard for them to get back on track. So Republicans sat down and we tried to come up with a plan that empowers parents to deal with the issues that kids are facing throughout this state. We understand there are no perfect solutions, but we think we've come up with a few solutions that will help parents direct their children's educational futures during this crisis. And for the next 12 months or so, we'll make sure that no kids in this state fall behind. With that, I'll turn it over to Whip Chippendale, who has the details of our proposal. And once he's done, we'll take any questions from the media. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming out this morning. I don't think it's necessary to elaborate on the fact that we're in a once-in-a-100-year crisis here, and with that, the challenges it's presented. We are all familiar with those, as we've been living it since March. As the leader set up, we are now at the point where the governor earlier this week had come out and offered her proposal and her guidelines for reopening schools. I think when I listened to that, I think that the proposal was, under the circumstances, just about the best possible mix of safety and educational, in-person educational opportunity that we could possibly come up with under these circumstances. But with that being said, we know that there are certain districts that are struggling to be able to open up and allow their students in-person learning. We feel, and as it was referenced, the McKinsey report demonstrates that the harm being done to our students, our children, by not being in school already from the spring has been substantial, and to continue it further or any further would only contribute to that harm that's being done. And without elaborating on it, we know, the mental health issues, the drug use issues, all of these things are factored in and starting to show spikes, and that's concerning to everyone, especially parents. Certainly we're in the middle of a campaign year, so we're talking to our constituents more so than ever. And a lot of the concerns that we're getting from those folks are what led to the product that we're offering today. We're hearing that parents are struggling, obviously, with the work scenario, whether they're working from home or having to stay home because there's no possible way for the children to be cared for during the day, or whether they're trying to do distance learning on the same computer that their parents need to do work. It really has created a lot of chaos in homes across the state. And again, it's understandable when the virus first started in the spring that this was going to be a bumpy ride, and the steps that were taken at the time seem to be the most appropriate. However, we've had the entire summer where our school districts have had plenty of time to preemptively start to think and consider those things that will be necessary in order for them to open up their schools. Regrettably, it doesn't appear as if all districts made the best use of that time. And I understand that when it comes to this crisis and the guidelines that are coming down from the Department of Health and from the governor's office, it's often changing with each press conference, and there's clarifications needed, and that complicates things. But nonetheless, that is not an excuse for the school districts, who know their buildings and their facilities better than anyone else, to have started taking precautionary measures to set up for this. So, with our belief that in-person learning is the best option and the most efficacious way for students to learn, we wanted to offer an alternative to those districts that feel they're in a position to only offer distance learning. And our proposal includes sort of a menu, if you will, of options for parents who find themselves in that situation. We know and we agree with the metrics that have been put in place regarding the health of the district and whether or not that determines if the district opens. That makes sense. If the disease rate is at a certain level, that school and that district should remain in place and doing what it's doing until they're healthy enough to return. That's already been addressed appropriately. However, those other districts where the disease rate is well below the mark it needs to be, and if they choose not to open fully for in-person learning, were this legislation to be enacted, would have options, the parents and the families. We believe the families know what's best for their children and in what environment that child prospers. So with that in mind, we want parents to be able to have the ability to say, okay, where am I going to send my child for school? They will have the choice now if their district is closed. So if a district refuses to open against the governor's order, these options will now be made available to those families. Those families can embrace the distance learning. That's something that some families feel will work well with their children. However, as I alluded to earlier, there may be some issues with competition for the technology. If mom or dad is working from home and there's limited computer equipment, etc., or if you have 3 children, one in 5th grade, one in middle school, one in high school, you could have obviously an issue there. We want to empower the parents in that scenario who embrace distance learning to be able to potentially purchase computers if they need them, the technological aspect of distance learning, and where their children start to fall behind or maybe struggling already, or additionally because of this, they should be able to hire additional help such as a tutor. And we're going to offer them a vehicle to do that. What we're proposing is our ESAs, basically the healthcare savings plans, but only for education. We all are familiar with those from our college 529s and from our healthcare savings accounts. These work much in the same way. The district that is closed would fund the ESA, and the parents would be able to draw from that money, although it would be under the guidance of RIDE and their parameters. So option 1, distance learning. If you need to purchase anything or if you need extra tutoring, you will get an ESA fund from your district that will offset those costs for you, so you're not bearing those costs yourself as a parent. Option 2 would be to send your child to another public school in the state that has the appropriate amount of space to accept more students. Of course, the disease parameters would still apply. So if you're from a district that has been precluded from in-person learning due to the disease rate, certainly you wouldn't be able to send that child into a district that is open. That would obviously be counterproductive to trying to control the health crisis. The child then would be able to get that in-person or that hybrid, whatever the district they choose is offering, and that need would be satisfied for that family. The third and final option, and certainly in my conversations with constituents, I have heard this repeatedly. A lot of families are embracing homeschooling. They had done a form of homeschooling this spring, and in some cases when the distance learning sort of went off the rails with their children, they fully embraced homeschooling, and many made the decision that until this is over, we will homeschool. So we want parents to be able to make that decision, I will homeschool. And homeschooling will require, RIDE has an entire documented process and standards, metrics, and criteria for those who choose to homeschool. That's already in place. We want those parents to be able to purchase curricula in a box. You know, they're online, they're available, you can purchase them right now, they're digital usually. We want them to be able to purchase any technology that might be necessary, be it computers, projectors. We want them to be able to purchase crayons and pencils and paper and soccer balls for the physical activity, which is a requirement of homeschooling, etc. And the Rhode Island Department of Education would be able to determine how much would be allocated to the ESA for the families who chose the homeschooling option, because they know roughly what the requirements are, and they also know what the district can afford to part ways with as far as funds go. So to be clear on the funding end of it, the funding is coming from the district where the child would ordinarily go to school. And it's only if that district chooses not to open. In that case, the per pupil price, which we, for sake of argument, can round to around $17,000 per child, is now essentially available. And from that, money will go into an ESA, which is controlled. It's like an EBT card. You can't just go out and buy Doritos and other superfluous items. You have to use it for appropriate purposes. So there's no room for abuse of funds. There's no room for any fraudulent transactions or anything of that nature. So far in conversation with parents and some community leaders, we've received some pretty strong support on this initiative, because there are parents who do feel very strongly that their child must have that social interaction. They must be in that school because they just aren't thriving in the distance learning environment. We also understand that a district that chooses not or chooses to not open against the governor's orders may be doing so because there are financial constraints. They have a lot of work to do to their school before they feel that they're ready to open up. So certainly people will ask the question, well, what happens when money from that district goes to bring the child either homeschooling or to another district? And that's a good question. We recognize that there will be substantial savings in school districts that do not have in-person learning. The lights aren't all going to be on. The janitorial services are going to be a fraction of what they were. Much of the staff, whether it's food service or other, it will not be a cost. There won't be a transportation cost. There will be savings to those districts which would free up funds otherwise not free. And furthermore, the CARES Act money is appropriate to be used in these ESAs. And I don't want to divert too much from the topic that we have here, but we are all familiar with the fact that there is an abundance of CARES Act money that has not been used yet. And this would work, frankly, I think it's about is it a half a billion? It's a lot of money. There is a substantial amount of money that can be used for those districts if there is an offset that they can't bear. It's an appropriate expenditure. I can't think of anything more appropriate because we're talking about generations of children. You do your development emotionally, mentally, educationally from birth to 26 or whatever the experts say. So those years are all very important. If a child misses a school year or has an interruption in a school year, or worse, a year that's so tumultuous it sets them back, we can see a generational impact. And again, this isn't our opinion. This has been documented in studies all across the board. We feel very comfortable in our position that in-person learning is appropriate. In fact, the leading proponents of in-person learning are the leading scientists on the issue, including Dr. Fauci in DC. So we understand the challenges of the districts, but we also understand and recognize the fundamental right that our courts have recognized and affirmed, that children have the right to an appropriate and proper education. That's a right that they have. And if they're not getting an appropriate and proper education through distance learning, then we would be negligent in not offering solutions. And that's what we're doing. And I'm hopeful that our colleagues in government, in the administrative branch, as well as our legislative partners will embrace this. By following standard legislative procedures, we could enact this legislation within 7 to 10 days. We could enact it before schools open. The ESA accounts function, again, very similarly to the accounts that parents are already familiar with. So learning curve-wise, there won't be much of an issue there. It's incumbent upon us to do everything possible to make it the best educational environment for the child. And that's exactly what we believe this legislation does. Have I omitted anything that you can?
Maybe with CARES Act, the parents and cars.
Sure. So we've heard a lot, especially from some of our southern states that have opened school a little bit earlier than we have. We've heard of this educational pods where parents are getting together and they are respecting the crowd size restrictions, the spacing distances, et cetera, but 3 families that choose to homeschool, but yet 2 of them the parents still have to go to work, they can rotate and have these educational pods where families will respect the guidelines of the distancing and also be able to homeschool in groups. They may be, one of the parents may be a certified teacher, but who doesn't actively teach. One may be someone who's been in an educational environment before, whatever. Or they can just be a parent like I am with no educational experience, but who feels I could administer a great education to my children, and I can team up with my neighbors if we want to make an educational pod. I think that's a fantastic idea. It's something that I was unaware of, or it's a concept that I wasn't aware of personally until this crisis occurred. And I really do think it is an absolutely viable option, and frankly, in many cases, I think it will be an option that parents do embrace. At this time, any questions?
You said 17,000 is available per student.
You know, it depends on the district. Each district's per pupil cost is different. I threw the 17 out because I think that's probably about the state average. And I think that most of this would be able to be achieved without even coming close to that 17,000 or whatever the average is for that district. Because again, a household may have 2 computers and they may need an additional computer and some other supplies, and you know, you're talking a couple of $1,000s. Tutoring services, I think tutoring services may be one of the more critical elements of this, and that is where perhaps there would be a rolling cost or a sliding cost, and these ESAs are a perfect vehicle for that, because any unexpended funds will automatically revert back to the district, and it's a way to account in a proper accounting fashion for each of those expenditures, so there can be a review after the fact. And I think, you know, it's important to remember that this crisis will hopefully end sooner rather than later. And this policy would only be in effect or only be applicable when we're in such a state of emergency. So when this goes away, and let's all hope by the end of the year, okay, or whenever it goes away, this bill is no longer, this law would no longer apply. And it would not be, you wouldn't be able to exercise it. So this isn't an attempt to try to revolutionize education. This is an attempt to offer a good set of options in the middle of a crisis that has really turned everything we know and do in our daily lives upside down. This is an opportunity for the state to take pre-existing functionalities, although they're all separately used right now, homeschooling's here and different schooling's there, but put it all in one, empower those parents who, again, they know what's best for their child. They would be able to do whatever they feel is best, and it's not going to put them in bankruptcy court, because frankly, in addition to the challenges of educating their children, so many families are financially struggling, whether it's been from furloughs, pay reductions, or job elimination. We've seen parents who are greatly stressed trying to put food on the table and also manage their child's education.
Would you say this is a direct result of those districts voting to do in person? I know districts have voted for that. Have you heard from constituents in those areas?
So me personally, I can answer for myself. I wouldn't dare answer for my colleagues. I have 2 school districts in my representative district, and one of those school systems is very confident that everything will go off without a hitch. I have another district that admittedly has challenges, and they will struggle. They haven't made a declaration yet, and I want them to know, and I want all school districts to know, that this is not an attempt to harm those districts. This is an attempt to alleviate some of the burden. If children migrate away from a district that's closed down, that's less of a burden, if you will. I mean financially when I say burden, on that district. There will be an opportunity for that district to work on improving that school. And I think we have to be mindful of the fact that last year we read about issues in our schools through the Johns Hopkins report in Providence, and I think all districts across the state at that point assessed their facilities. I know this. The schools in my district certainly did, and based on the information, what they learned from Providence, they want to start working to be ahead of the curve. And we've seen that. We passed a lot of bonds this year for certain districts to make those improvements. I think the districts genuinely want to get themselves compliant, and we want them to be able to. We believe this will help them do that while meeting we are responsible as legislators for the administration of the education of our children. The Supreme Court has already acknowledged, and it is a fundamental right. We would be negligent to not try to come up with functional alternatives under these circumstances.
Could you talk about how each family, how you quantify what each family needs in ESA, that would be dealt with on an individual basis, is that right?
It would, yeah. I think it would depend largely on which option they choose, of course. Furthermore, RIDE has all of the parameters for, and we, the legislature has endowed RIDE, the Rhode Island Department of Education, with a tremendous amount of power to promulgate their own policies, rules, and regulations in respect of all of this. They understand and know the curricula for homeschooling, right? So if you've got 3 kids, or whatever, let's just stick with one. If you have one child who's homeschooling, the curriculum for that, they can tell you exactly what it is, how many hours they need of physical activity, et cetera, et cetera. At that point, they would be able to calculate based on what the parent tells them. Oh, we've got plenty of sporting goods. We've got a big backyard. I have 2 computers already, but I don't have any curriculum. They can estimate with a certain amount of accuracy what would be necessary for that. And again, I think it's important to remember that anything abundant after all the expenditures are going to revert right back to the district anyway. And the ESA it's just a financial vehicle, if you will, for the management of that money, rather than parents, tendering a whole pocket full of receipts at the end of the year, saying, all right, this is all the stuff I bought, and I'm going to have to prove to you why I needed all this stuff, and then you can write me a check. That's untenable and unmanageable. So the ESAs really make it quite simple to on the accounting end of it and the auditing end of it. That's right, and in the legislation is a mandate for RIDE to do exactly, to address exactly the question you asked, to come up with those guidelines. Here, if you choose this option, here's what we will need from you for information, and here's what you can expect from us. RIDE has been fantastic with meeting the needs of the districts as they bring them up. Certainly we've been in warp speed, right, because this started in the spring, we had the summer, RIDE has been waiting for information from DOH, but they are the best at what they do, and they can come up with the regulations, they can come up with the stipulations, they can come up with the formulations, whatever they have to do to tell those parents. It's all in their hands. As legislators, we recognize, some of our colleagues are former educators, but we recognize we're not educational experts. RIDE is the expert. So we can create the tools for RIDE to chisel out the statute, but they know how to chisel statutes, we don't. If that answers your question.
Yeah, when we were coming up with this idea over the past several weeks, what's going on recently between Warwick and the governor and press conferences, someone had asked, well, are you taking the side of the governor against the city of Warwick? And we want to be clear, we're not. We've publicly said that we think the state government is behind the 8 ball. The fact that they're doing inspections of schools now shows that they haven't really done what they're supposed to do. Our opinion is back in April and May, they should have inspected all these schools, including Warwick, and they should have spent the CARES Act funding on installing air circulation, air filtration, HVAC systems in schools that didn't have them. So if we're going to take Warwick and use that as an example, we think the state didn't do what it was supposed to do, and those federal money should have been spent to get Warwick on the up and up so they could do in-person learning. So we're really not taking anyone's side other than children and parents. We are where we are now, and we're trying to address it. We're not trying to cast aspersions or take sides, but we think that there really are no angels here. Things weren't done right. That federal money should have been spent a long time ago to get our schools ready, and it wasn't, and this is the best options we can provide in light of that. Anything else? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.